flyways, reducing energy infrastructure-related bird mortality in the Mediterranean project, an initiative that is funded by MAVA and led by many of the partners in the room, including BirdLife International, IUCN, MED, WWF, Spain, Greece, University of Barcelona, VCF, and Euronatur. So we are hoping that in this meeting of today, we are introducing a major international platform for energy. And we are hoping that this platform is fully understood, used properly, expansion of its coverage in the region. All is related to, as we know, that with the great demand on energy, there is a need to reconciliate to ensure that energy and environmental considerations, biodiversity, especially birds, are taken well into account. And this is the purpose of introducing this important international platform, the CMS Energy Task Force. Before I proceed with our two distinguished speakers, let me just ask Shannon, our custodian of the event, to ensure that we have some housekeeping remarks. Shannon, from your side, please.
Thanks, Osama. So just a quick note, everyone, thanks for joining the webinar. You will have noticed that your cameras and your microphones are automatically switched off. If we could please keep it that way just to save on bandwidth and background noise during the presentations. Whilst Harvey and Ash are speaking, we'll encourage you to put all your questions that you might have as they come up in the chat, and then there will be designated time after the presentations to address all of the questions that you have. So that's all from me. Thanks, Osama.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Excellent. So get ready, get your questions in the chat box. We'll hope to have an opportunity to look at each and every question as we go, and others even beyond the time limit of the event if needed. So directly, I would like to introduce Dr. Ashton Barry, who's the Global Climate Change Program Coordinator at the Science and Policy Team in BirdLife International, and the main figure in leading and coordinating the work of the Energy Task Force. So Ashton, you're most welcome. Thank you for giving us the time and effort to join this event, and please, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Osama, for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for giving us the opportunity to talk to you today, and good morning or evening, as the case may be, to you. I'm going to just introduce our presentation today at the very beginning, and then I'll pass the baton over to Harvey, my colleague Harvey Rich, who's going to present the first half of the presentation. And then I'll come in at the end and present the last half before we finish up for questions following the presentation. So it's very good to meet you, so we'll make a start. So as you can see on the screen there in front of you, I'm going to talk today about the CMS Energy Task Force. The Energy Task Force is owned by the CMS and is coordinated on behalf of the CMS by BirdLife International. So I work for BirdLife International and coordinate the Energy Task Force, along with the coordination team, which is staff from BirdLife, Harvey, and staff from the CMS. Great, thank you. So I'll now pass it over to Harvey to start us off. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ashton. Yes, hello everyone. My name's Harvey, Harvey Rich. I am Global Policy Officer at BirdLife, as Ashton just mentioned, and supporting with the Energy Task Force. And I'm going to kick us off today. We are going to do a couple of polls during this session. I'm not sure how many of you have used polls before, but it's just to get a feel of who's in the room, what your experiences are, and sort of your interest and approach to the Energy Task Force. So I'm just going to share the first poll, which is just to get a feel of your background. So I will wait. Ashton or Osama, can you confirm?
Yes, the poll is already on the screen. Thank you very much, Harvey.
Perfect. So we'll just give around a minute for people to. Oh, we've got a lot of fellow NGOs in the room, I see, which is good to see. So we'll just give a little bit more time. Perfect. I'll just give 10 more seconds just to allow everyone to finalize their votes. Perfect. So let me now share, and Osama, you can give the thumbs up as well if it's on the screen.
It is.
Perfect. So that's very interesting. That's good to know for us that we have a large sort of NGO backing here and background. Good little set the scene. So thank you very much for participating in that poll, and going forward, as I mentioned, we'll have a couple more for you. So I am going to start off just with the aim of providing a brief background on renewable energy and biodiversity. I'm sure we have some specialists in this agenda, but maybe some people that are fairly new to the field. So just to give an understanding of why it's important, what specific factors we're talking about. And as Ashton said, a very brief introduction to the Energy Task Force. So we know the renewable energy transition is very much needed to achieve a climate resilient future. And as we can see on the slide here, it's forecast to be a significant increase in renewable energy power in the next 4 to 5 years, up to 50%, which, to put this in perspective, is about the equivalent of the total installed capacity in the United States. So both in terms of the quantity of that and the spatial significance of that, we're talking a real huge amount of forecast capacity. Of course, as I said, spatially and in terms of the quantity, that has potential significant impacts on biodiversity. We're already seeing that currently. 20% of global large-scale renewable energy facilities, so with that regard, we're talking about hydropower, wind and solar, are operated within important conservation areas. So by that we mean protected areas, key biodiversity areas and wilderness areas. And in Africa, that's up to 40%. So it's quite a significant amount. And if we're looking at achieving these 50% increase and these targets, studies have indicated that potentially impacts over 11 million hectares of natural lands. So really, as the image on the right shows, this means we need to be adaptive, creative with our management, where we install renewables, how we approach it in terms of biodiversity, and it's something we'll be touching on today. In terms of the 3 key areas, if we're looking at impacts on biodiversity, we'd like to think of it, you've got direct, indirect and cumulative impacts on the one hand species, so migratory species, in terms of impacts associated with collision, direct collision, for example, with a wind turbine, displacement, electrocution with power lines. Then we've got habitats, so potential impacts with connectivity, a real loss of biodiversity, and a loss of ecosystem services, another key area, and sort of the human interactions with biodiversity. And then the third one being carbon, which is sometimes overlooked, is in certain parts of the world, for example, renewable energy infrastructure is going up in places of high carbon value. So, for example, cutting down a large area of forest, or in some important wetlands or peatlands, and that potentially can release huge amounts of carbon, and at the same time prevent the potential carbon storage of those sites. And in that regard, and in terms of the Energy Task Force, we sort of have this remit of these 6 key, if we think of these 6 key renewable energy technologies, and I'm not going to go into each of these in detail, very complex and diverse threats posed to each of these migratory species, and the level of impact varies. Some are well documented, for example, wind, as many of you will know, we have a good understanding of. Others, maybe such as certain impacts of solar or geothermal, etc., are less well known. But in terms of wind turbines, for example, impacts associated with collision, habitat loss, disturbance. In the Africa-Eurasian region, which is of key interest to this discussion, hundreds of thousands of collisions occur and across the region annually, so a significant impact. And I just wanted to briefly show you an example, a short video of this issue in a vulture collision with a wind turbine. So soaring birds, especially raptors, are particularly vulnerable to these issues. Large-bodied, limited maneuverability, and flight behaviours often heighten this risk of collision. Similarly, with power lines, an associated facility that's always required if we're talking about energy facilities, again, if sited in the wrong place, can have significant impacts on the species we're interested in. So with that in mind, and one of the key focuses of the Energy Task Force and what we advocate for, and BirdLife as well, is understanding the strategic importance of this within the planning environment. So I've just wanted to talk through a sort of this diagram on the left-hand side. If we take the green area, for example, we're suggesting these as areas of high wind potential. The areas of red, areas of high species sensitivity, particularly those you can see with the soaring bird in the square. What we'd of course like to see, and what should happen, is in many countries have shown there is potential wind potential in many countries in areas that do not have sensitive that are not sensitive for biodiversity. However, too often what we're seeing is these wind turbines, for example, going up in sensitive areas. It's similar with the diagram in the middle with linear infrastructure, and if we're talking about power lines connecting A to B, we need to do assessments of this area, and rather than putting the infrastructure in and then we're retrofitting in, say, bird diverters or other physical mitigation solutions, it's really understanding this early importance of planning. So on the right hand side, we've got the mitigation hierarchy and the importance of the very first ones of those being avoidance, and the significant benefits to power producers, to investors as well in this early avoidance, in terms of reducing potential impacts and potential liability and associated sort of concern from stakeholders, reducing the need for mitigation and cost implications later on, and often very time consuming aspects associated with that. So with that in mind, just a very brief background on the topic. I just want to illustrate the role of the Energy Task Force before handing over Ashton, an overview and introduction to the task force. And ultimately, it's really a platform to explore, discuss and find solutions to the concerns I presented earlier on. And I should add, it's good to see some familiar faces. There's many people joining, which I know are involved in the task force in some capacity. So this will be more of a refresher for you. So as Ashton mentioned at the start, it's the Energy Task Force was initiated by the Convention on Migratory Species. And the CMS has been dealing with interactions between migratory species and the energy sector for a number of years now, but in 2014, the mandate was given to establish the Energy Task Force, and which was supported financially by the German government up until the end of this year, when we'll be taking over with new funding sources. And just to give you a sense of the coverage, the remit of the Energy Task Force, so ultimately, the goal is to engage all stakeholders in the process to reconcile renewable energy with the conservation of migratory species. So really to increase understanding, knowledge sharing, engagement on this issue. So in terms of the coverage, the Energy Task Force is global. Currently, there's a very big stakeholder and engagement focus in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, although recently we have expanded into Americas with, for example, Brazil becoming a member and Asia interest there. In terms of the energy technologies, we cover all renewables, so the ones I presented at the beginning. However, again, largely because of the members involved and the focus of the work to date in the industry or in the sector, there's a big focus on power lines, wind and solar. And in terms of taxa, covering all migratory taxa, but again, largely associated with the technologies, a real focus on birds and bats to date. But again, expanding and always interested in understanding backgrounds from different partners. So in terms of just bringing this together, although the Energy Task Force sits within the Convention of Migratory Species, it's important not to forget how it is linked to the wider nature, climate, sustainable developments world or global nexus. So we see on the top left, for example, the 2020, the Convention on Biological Diversity and its post-2020 agenda to follow the Aichi targets. particularly interest in the impacts on sites and species, so protected areas, key biodiversity areas, etc. Bottom left, we've got the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. Clear focus on renewable energy growth, but how can we influence that to ensure it's nature sensitive growth? And for example, nationally determined contributions that many nations are submitting to decide on their energy mix going forward to meet the Paris Agreement goals on climate change. And then just on the right hand side, another key area is the Sustainable Development Goals, and I've just highlighted four of the key goals here that we really contribute to. So again, important to understand this in the wider context. Although CMS, this platform has a much wider remit. So in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, we have the clean energy, climate action, life below water, and life on land. So I briefly mentioned a very wide-ranging membership. You can see on the slide here, we have over 40 participants. I won't be testing you on all of these at the end, don't worry, because I appreciate, there's quite a few to go through. But in a nutshell, we have 15 governments, as you can see on the top left, a number of MEAs, including CMS, CBD, Ramsar, and government agencies and other relevant organisations on the left-hand side as well. So I should add, the left-hand side is all of our members, and on the right-hand side is our observers. Ashton will go into this in a bit more detail later, what the difference is between that, but the observership is very much focused more on the NGO community. And something we have started, and there's real interest in actually, is creating a business pool of industry. So engaging with a number of consultants and industry representatives to try and translate some of this information we're generating and make it useful in the sector. And all are welcome to participate. And as I said, Ashton will go into this in more detail shortly. Just in terms of the Energy Task Force scope, just sort of as a base understanding. So we have 3 key documents that govern and guide the Energy Task Force. On the first one being the work plan, which was established in 2018 and guides the direction. We're currently drafting a new work plan post 2020. Which some of you are already involved in, and we'll be finalising this. We've got an upcoming meeting in December for any who are interested, which again we can talk about later on. But this is where we'll be finalising the next stage of the work plan, which is quite exciting, and trying to really generate and continue the momentum we've already built. The second key document is the modus operandi, which is basically our terms of reference. What is our, how does the ETF function? What's its focus? And I've presented a bit about that already, and Ashton will go into more detail. And then finally, the Cape Town Declaration, which highlights the commitment of the ETF. It's a document, and all 3 of these documents are on the Energy Task Force website, and we're more than happy to share these going forward. And then in terms of when we talk about the scope, these are the 6 sort of fundamental aspects we're talking about. For example, top right, we can see promote success stories. We're talking about showcasing what our members are doing, the projects, the impacts on the ground, developing case studies, allowing them to participate in meetings, webinars. Then we also have addressing research gaps. So a number of our members are part of the Energy Task Force Technical Working Group, which focuses on key issues we want to contribute to, key gaps. And then finally, if I mentioned briefly the strengthening network. So I mentioned the annual meetings. We try and get together as an Energy Task Force network as often as possible. We had a meeting in August, virtually. Obviously, COVID is affecting how we meet, but always trying to come together as a task force. So I hope that's provided a very brief understanding of sort of where the task force stands. And I will hand over to Ashton now, who will talk a bit more about the Energy Task Force and specific aspects.
Great, thank you very much, Harvey. That was great. So what I'm going to do is just talk about what the ETF does, the different work areas that it has, and what are the benefits of joining towards the end. I'll talk through some of those benefits with you. So next slide. by the way, Harvey's controlling the slides for me today. So, but before we start, we have another Zoom poll question for you. What ETF work area are you most interested in? So on the screen in front of you, you'll see poll 2, ETF areas. So if you can indicate by selecting one of those areas that you're most interested in and submitting that, this will be very useful for us to gather information on what different groups are most engaged in, what's most important to them. And that will allow us to help support better. Being a global network, we really, one of the powers of the ETF is getting the cross-reference of different ideas, different approaches, and different perspectives. So we'll just give a little bit more time.
Yeah, we're up to 50%, Ashton, so we'll just give
Okay.
a little bit more time.
It might be that people would have preferred to be having more than one option to be given. It's a bit of a choice here that is to be made, really.
Yes, that occurred to me just as it came up. It's a good comment, Osama.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. So we've got some percentages in now. And as you can see there on the screen in front of you, understanding and promoting best practice guidance, standards and planning tools is the second most important element, and understanding and promoting migration solutions is the top percentage that people have voted for today, or indicated rather, their interest. And as Osama said, yes, I'm sure many of you are interested in lots of those areas, but that still will give us an indication on what the hottest topics are that people are interested in. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so I said to you just before that we'll talk through some of the main core functions of the Energy Task Force. But just before I go, as part of this, this first one here, number 1, cooperation, knowledge exchange and networks, is just to pick up on the point I made that one of the core benefits of the Energy Task Force is this ability to gather and support a wide range of partners, stakeholders, as members or observers of the Energy Task Force. So you can see on the screen there we have a range of logos from different organisations that are members. The picture you can see there is of the second Energy Task Force meeting. So the membership has changed a bit. People come and go in their positions, so we get different faces coming in, and also, of course, the Energy Task Force has grown substantially since that photo was taken as well. We do have the latest photo from the most recent meeting for you a bit later on towards the end. We communicate with the members and observers through a range of mechanisms. The most powerful, I guess, version of that is the annual meetings. Harvey mentioned we have our 2020 annual meeting starting on the 30th of November and continuing on the 1st of December, followed by a ETF webinar on the 2nd of December. These are taking up most of the day on each of those. On those days, I mentioned those dates. The first 2 days are the Energy Task Force, the official meeting, which is just for members and observers. It's an invite-only meeting, and it's quite a formal process. And the 3rd day is our webinar, where we get to talk far more to much more of a public audience and give our members an opportunity to talk about all the great work they've been doing and showcase that work. So we gather information and we share that information with our stakeholders, and we ensure collaboration and action going forward. We engage with IFIs and identify entry points and opportunities for investment, looking for the most the best point in time for planning opportunities. We talk to the IFI and other investors on their arrangements and how investors and countries can fit in with those arrangements. And we engage with and support the development of industry. We'll work with industry, alerting them to best practice and various tools. And we'll also cover some case studies. We strongly encourage our members to provide us with as many case studies as possible to allow other members and the community at large to see the examples of what's possible. Next slide, please. We work on number 2 is we work on CMS resolutions on energy in a facilitatory role. We support that process, and so we will send out resolutions, draft resolutions. If resolutions need to be updated, we'll send those out to our members asking for comments. The members will give their comments and feedback, and then we'll send that back. And we help to facilitate the process that the CMS has, its scientific and policy processes for how, procedural processes for how these resolutions are developed. And then finally, we will present those to the CMS for validation. Next slide, please. Yeah. We do a lot of work mainstreaming with global guidelines and standards. We have, as you can see on the screen there, a number of our members have produced guidelines. We have produced our own guidelines in the past as well, and we work with our members to promote the guidelines that they have produced. And we'll publish and promote those guidelines as much as we can. So the examples we have there is IUCN guidelines for mitigating biodiversity impacts associated with solar and wind energy development. And also we're currently working on a project with EBRD, IFC and KfW in the development of a good practice handbook on the design of post-construction monitoring of bird and bat fatalities at wind energy facilities. So it's post-construction. So that's a really exciting development. Next slide. We also communicate a wide range of tools to the industry. We support those tools where we can, and we gather them, and then we promote those tools to other people. The ones you can see on the screen there, the Soaring Bird Sensitivity Mapping Tool, BirdLife International coordinates and develops that tool, and it enables the people using that tool to look at different flyways and look at where those flyways are, which areas the birds are using, and it enables you to help plan to where you're going to site your energy infrastructure so that you can mitigate as far as possible where you're locating and the impact that has on bird species. And then you'll also see IBAT there. It's an online web-based tool that can be used that gives you access to some very authoritative, the world's most authoritative data sets on endangered species, on protected areas, on a range of key biodiversity areas, etc. Okay, next slide. We also promote innovative mitigation solutions, and we reach out to the industry to find what's the latest in this research, what's being researched, what's being developed, and the areas that we do find, we try and promote as much as possible. So these are specifically designed for areas where renewable energy infrastructure has already been in place. So the first one there is the post-construction monitoring. I mentioned that we're looking at a best practice handbook for post-construction monitoring to assist people with that. The second image there is radar technology. We work with some members. We help promote shutdown on demand technology using radars. Two of our business pool members or associates, Robin Radar and Strix, and they specialise in radar technology. So we work with them to try and put them in touch with people who are looking at that type of technology, and then they can assist them in going forward. And also the retrofitting of bird flappers and bird diverters to power lines to help mitigate electrocution. So we will try and communicate these technologies as they're developed as best as possible. We also look at research and filling knowledge gaps. So we have technical working groups within the work plan and within the membership that will come together, and we will look at those gaps and try and develop research around those gaps, look for funding opportunities. We have some key partners in doing that, members of the Energy Task Force, the University of Mexico, Eurobats, and the British Trust for Ornithology also are doing some really important research in this area, and others. But they're three of the major research areas that we work with within the working group. The sensitivity mapping I mentioned to you earlier, looking at developing data sets to enable us to do sensitivity mapping. Bird tracking to understand species interactions with renewables, and the post-construction monitoring I've also already mentioned too. And last but not least, improving understanding for bats and the impact of renewables on bats. So working with Eurobats and others to try and promote the impact on bats as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we wanted to do here is just present two case studies to you of members that we have that have presented. So Kenya and Jordan. The first one is Kenya here. And Kenya has produced strategic environmental assessment, and it's the first of its type in Kenya, the first of its kind in Kenya. And it's the Wind Energy and Biodiversity C, the strategic environmental assessment, it seeks to integrate biodiversity into decisions that relate to wind power development in Kenya. And they assessed a range of areas. So there's 144 sensitive species, including bats and migratory and resident birds, KBAs, migratory routes, protected areas, wetlands, slopes, ridgelands, etc., etc. So a wide variety of areas were assessed, and a wide range of partners as well were included in this particular project. So the people that developed this particular project have a far greater amount of detail on this case study, and we can provide contact details if you'd like to find out more. So I'm just giving you an overview of the types of work that different partners are involved with. So what we do is we get these case studies and we'll promote them. We put them on our website and we promote them widely to give people an idea of what's possible. Next slide. And this is a case study in Jordan, and it's about regional wind farm planning. And it's an integrated and coordinated regional approach to farming that aims to reduce mortality of migratory soaring birds in the Jordan Rift Valley in particular from collision with wind farms. And they developed national safeguard guidelines as part of this project. The Ministry of Environment, with support from the Royal Society for the Conservation of Nature, established national energy roundtables to facilitate the sharing of data, and they have a range of next steps that they're going to engage in, for example, capacity building of national governments, launching national online collision databases, monitoring and assessment, and developing national guidelines for power lines as well. So there's a range of activities within, obviously within wind farm planning, and this Jordan case study provides some really good information about what they're engaged with there, and gives you an insight into how you can also do similar things. Okay, next slide. So we're going to go through a process, just letting you know approach or the approach for becoming involved or joining the Energy Task Force. Any member of the Energy Task Force can nominate other people that they think might be interested in the Energy Task Force. If the nominee agrees and would like to be nominated for a position on the Energy Task Force, the coordination team, particularly myself and Harvey, will send the potential nominee a form that they can fill out. They provide details about how they'd like to be involved or why they'd like to be involved, and the different elements that they think they can offer to the Energy Task Force and its members. The membership is made up from two main areas, so become a full member or an observer. And as Harvey mentioned earlier, members are governments, conventions, investment banks, and other representative bodies. And the observers typically are formed from NGOs and other groups in the same way, so universities, etc. So you will tell us which one you want to be. The main difference between the two is that the members, importantly, are able to vote for the direction of the Energy Task Force, for the incoming chair and vice chair, for the direction of the work plan and the types of activities that we're engaged with, the scope and the remit of the Energy Task Force. Members are able to vote for those things, but observers are able to fully engage in the process. They just aren't able to vote is the main difference. So it's an open-ended membership. MEAs, government institutions, representative of energy industries, relevant academic institutions and NGOs. We developed the business pool purely because the rules of the CMS, the convention, is that we can't have members, individual service providers that are part of as members of the Energy Task Force. And that's very importantly because the convention isn't in a position where it can support any particular individual business over any other. So we've developed the business pool to enable businesses, service providers to be engaged with the Energy Task Force, but where they're not approved or approved members of the Energy Task Force. But they have a key role to play. They have an enormous array of information and knowledge and expertise. So we really do encourage them to get involved. Okay. And one last Zoom poll before the end. This is about the second last slide. So we're going to pop up, are you interested in joining the ETF? The membership is free. There's no fee. And members generally will determine the areas that they work in. So recently we sent out the new draft work plan for post 2020, and we actually asked members which elements of that work plan they would like to engage in. So members do have a choice as to which area they'd like to engage in, but it's really up to the members and observers to decide that. It's certainly not dictatorial. We're not telling you have to engage in a certain way. So it's very open in that regard.
Thanks, Ashton. For those who are already members, what would be their choice?
If you're already members of the Energy Task Force, yes, it's probably not one. There should have been an extra circle there for people that were already members. It just says yes. Don't okay. Complete any of these if you're already a member.
We just give it a few more seconds, Ashton, because okay. We're up to just about 60%.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone.
And just quickly to add, Ash, to your point, if people have answered yes, they can put their name and email address directly to Ash or Harvey in the chat box if they'd like, so that Ash and Harvey can follow up with you and be in touch about your membership.
Yes, so yes, we'll follow up very quickly with an email and give you the form that you need to complete. We'll talk to you about that and answer any questions you may have. Once we submit the nomination form to the members decide on each of the different nominations, and it's a 2-week process. So if we haven't heard from any of the members with any reason that they or any question they might have about the nomination, the nominee becomes a member or an observer as whichever they've decided on. Great, well, thank you. That's we've completed that. So yes, however, I'm not sure if I should be a member or an observer is the biggest 38% of the vote, and 23% is yes as an observer, and 23% is no. However, I would be interested in keeping up to date with the ETF. So that's a really good. Thank you very much for saying that. If you're one of the yes groups, please put your email address and name in the chat, and we will be in contact with you very shortly with all the details you need to become a member.
And I would just add to Ashton, sorry, that if for whoever has put yes, however, I'm not sure if I be a member or observer, please, during the question and answer session after this, please say what specific concerns or questions you may have, or as mentioned, put a message in the chat for us, and we'll be happy to answer that.
Yes, and we can guide you through that as well after the meeting as well, so we can give you examples. Great. So thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. You can see our contact details there as well, and we can provide those to you. But if you do put your name in the chat, or any questions you may have that you want us to follow up with an email, please do, and we'll follow up with you. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Ashton, and I'm sure that was very informative and educational for many of the people in the room. And we have also with us some of the key stars of work in the region with the Energy Task Force. So by the time we have more questions, or people are encouraged to put your questions, let me look at the questions we already have. So when should other taxa also be considered? That's Ilke from Euronatur. Thank you, Ilke, for that. We have, for example, through about, sorry, there are many questions coming in. Get back to questions from Ilke, sorry. Yeah, so thought about migratory fish species, hydropower, which normally also have to be considered under CMS. Are there any plans for this?
Yes, not so much in the way of plans in the first instance. We're a group, the ETF is guided by its membership. If we have members that would like to pursue that area or are already pursuing those interests, we would definitely get behind you. Of course, like anyone, we are constricted by funding. In the post-2020 budget that we've produced, and we're searching for funding at the moment to fill, we have much more scope to look at other taxa as well, but we'd very much like to. The remit of the Energy Task Force is all taxa that is affected by particularly migratory species that are affected by renewable energy. So all renewables and all taxa, and we have a global remit as well.
Thank you. Another question, thanks, Emily. She's asking whether you can give us a bit of some glimpses of what are the plans for the ETF post 2020?
Sure, we have a draft work plan at the moment that we will be working through in great detail in the upcoming annual meeting. We have some core areas. I don't have it open with me right now, but we will be having a big focus on the communication of information to members. We will have a large research component to fill the gaps, and a range of other processes. I wished I'd had the draft work plan open in front of me at the moment, but those areas that I detailed to you in my presentation, all those areas are going to be continuing through into the new work plan. So that's very important to us, is to facilitate and guide and communicate best practice and new technologies, new data. We, for example, have developed a database of renewable energy and the impact it can have on species. So we have of all renewable energies and all species. So we have a database that is growing and is quite large now. And we can offer that information to members and observers whenever they require. We can provide those references. So we hope to build that area as well. And we also would like to leverage funding that the ETF has in future to look at other projects with members as well, so we can assist members in that in the fundraising capacity as well.
Thank you.
If I could just add very briefly,
Sure.
I think my comment just touches on what Ilka kindly put in the chat, that I think in the next phase we're hoping, whereas we highlighted during the presentation, to date it's been very focused on wind power lines, you know, particularly Europe, the Middle East and Africa. There's a real interest in driving into Asia, the Americas, and really expanding some of the knowledge we've built up in this region. And we're finding real interest from that. And I think, Ashton, you'd agree as well, trying to engage even more with industry, the finance sector, to spread it more widely and really become a fully multi-stakeholder group.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Lucia, also for your question. The question, it would be, could you please explain more for the main differences between the different tools, the IBAT, the sensitivity mapping, apart from the fact that one is open source and the other needs a subscription?
Should I take that one?
Yes, Harvey works with a lot more with IBAT than I do. So Harvey.
No problem. So yeah, IBAT is very much a project or asset level tool. So it's used particularly in environmental impact assessments or for screening of individual projects. So for example, if you have a wind farm, and as you mentioned in your chat, IBAT is a subscription-based tool, so you have to pay for that service. It is the 3 data sets, being key biodiversity areas, protected areas, and red list of species, are all available publicly for non-commercial use. But IBAT is the commercial avenue of those 3 data sets, so it's mainly for developers, investment banks, etc., and provides spatial mapping of those 3 different data sets. For example, it will tell you within the 500 meters of your site how many protected areas there are, what is the ranges of sensitive species, whereas the sensitivity mapping tool is far more sort of the regional landscape scale. It includes specific data on sort of bird tracking, and is more tailored towards soaring bird sensitivity, whereas IBAT is more generic biodiversity. But there is some overlap in that the soaring bird tool also shows some sensitive areas.
Thank you, Harvey. I think we touched base on it, but it's good to remind the group of it. Basma is asking about, again, the differences between being a member and being an observer. I can comment on that after also the reply. So Harvey or Ashton, would like to remind us again of the...
Sure. The main difference is the ability to vote for different elements that are put to the ETF. So for example, voting in and approving the new work plan. Once we've completed a final draft, we'll put that to the members and they're able to vote on whether they agree with it or not. Voting in a new chair. Each year we vote in we enable a new chair and vice chair to be nominated, and the members will vote on who they think that should be, and various other elements like that throughout the work plan. But observers are able to involve in all those areas, they just don't have the vote. And that's the main difference between a member and an observer.
A comment from my side, if I may, it is, we would like to see that platform performing best the way it is. And it's always important to ensure that while the commitment of the NGOs is in a way taken for granted to be in the right direction, it is governments and the private sector or the companies that are doing the work in the energy sector that is sometimes not always easy to bring them to the table and to engage fully. So from my perspective, in the project at least perspective, we are trying to use the role of the NGOs as gateways to bring in their governments and to bring in the TSOs, for example, when it comes to power lines or the wind developers, to the table, so that that action of dialogue takes place. So it is, I would say, the main task of the NGOs in their countries to speak to their, for example, CMS national focal points, to speak about the main stakeholders in players in the industry and make sure they join the ETF rather than themselves joining, which will always take for granted their support for the overall mission and vision of the ETF. Thank you for that. Adel coming from Egypt, and I would like to highlight here the important role that Egypt have played, the government of Egypt. I'm very happy to see Dr. Fouda with us, Usama, the director of the MSP project in Egypt, and the former chair of the ETF. I'm very happy that they are there. Egypt have played a major role, and it's a distinguished country really in the region. Adel is asking about, is it possible for the ETF to work on developing a standard guidance for mitigation solutions to be endorsed by the CMS during COPs and to be disseminated for the different parties, or already this is in place? Javi, you would like to take that? We are working a lot on that already.
Yeah, I mean, we do have, Ashton presented earlier, there's the guidelines on sustainable deployment of renewable energy facilities that the Energy Task Force has developed, and it's a guidelines that we update annually through contributions from the members, and it's almost it's both a guidance document and a guide to guidelines, as we call it, as Osama knows that phrase well as well. But it lists both best practice and also suggest best practice documents, web pages, resources, really useful. So we'd be very happy to send that out following this, and it's a useful base. And certainly you can get in touch with us, as Ashton's already mentioned, for any specific queries related to that.
Excellent, thank you very much. And Theo, thank you very much for your question, because it is an important issue that have been raised even before this meeting. What approaches do you use to identify the most dangerous power lines for both collisions and electrocution? It has been set in under different threats. The concepts of hotspots, black spots have been introduced. Any specific criteria for that when it comes to power lines? Thank you.
I can answer that one. Excuse me. The Energy Task Force is a body that represents its members. So it's an organisation of members, a task force. The members that we have enormous experience in the area that you're talking about there in your question with power lines, particularly some of our members in South Africa and others have a lot of experience in that area. So what we would do is ask them to provide that information for us, and they will identify the various approaches that have been globally researched. They will identify all that information, and they have already been identifying that information. So we would, if someone was to approach us and ask that question, as you have, the first thing we would do would be to very quickly direct your request to the specific members that have that knowledge. We are very serious about that, because we don't want to provide information that we've just learnt from someone else to you as if we're the experts. We want to provide you with the best experts globally. And that's one of the real benefits of the Energy Task Force, is as a member and observer, you have that ability to find out this information quite quickly through the Energy Task Force. We can direct you to the right people. And I do this on a regular basis, be it offshore wind or onshore wind. people will contact me and say, who do you know within the network that's working on offshore wind radar technology? So I am familiar with what people are doing, so I'll quickly determine that you need to speak to this person and that person. This person is developing radar technology. This other organisation is actually doing the research on those impacts and how radar technology can be a benefit. So I can direct you to those people. So that would be probably the best answer.
Thank you. Thank you. And that has been, Theo, that has been a national process in many of the countries under the different projects that are being coordinated by BirdLife. There has been a national effort starting from reviewing existing literature and data and then going on in a process, building up, ending by the country in itself, identifying the most dangerous ones and those black spots, if I may call them. And then perhaps at one future stage, we will be cross-referencing those criteria and the ways that we have done. Probably a task for us will be to come up, and that is already in our list, to come up with a model of how this is going to be done. And we are already in progress into working such a document that is hopefully being there by mid of next year maximum, hopefully. Great. I'm seeing we are there, grand of the hour. Any final comments, any final input from our audience in this webinar? Okay. I will see with Alex from the Kenya BirdLife Secretariat is asking, the database on impact of energy infrastructure on birds and biodiversity is ready for query. Do you generate regular report based on it, or still is it under development?
The database is ongoing. Obviously, there's constantly new research being done, and there's new research being published, and new guidelines being developed and new guidelines being published. So we never think of the database as finished. We'd like to constantly update it with the latest information. So we have some all the way from publications that were published 10 years ago all the way up to ones that were published this year. So we have a range of publications, and that's very useful for people to use. Ultimately, funding permitting, in the next phase of the ETF, what we really want to do is have that database accessible to our members and observers. We just haven't worked out how we can actually do that. We'd put it perhaps on the web page. We would have to put, and have some funding to do that. And in the first, this work plan that's just been completed, we didn't have access to those funds. But going forward, we'd like to, so instead of having a middleman, instead of being emailing me and saying, what literature have you got on these sorts of activities, you'd be able to go onto the web page and use a keyword search to find that information. The database sits within BirdLife. It's I think it must be up to almost 1,000 entries now. The last time I looked, it was over 600, and I know the science team, we have a large science team in BirdLife International. They've been adding entries on a regular basis. So it's a very large database and has some amazing information in there.
Harvey, would you like to comment on our recent efforts in trying to go global with a database that is capturing?
Yeah, I was going to clarify. I think Alex Ashton said it well, that it's a literature database. But Osama, are you referring to the post-construction?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ashton briefly touched on it, but there's two key projects we're currently working on with the ETF. The first one is a global guidelines, which also touches on Theo's comment, a global guidelines for wind and solar and power lines, led by IUCN. And that will be applicable to industry experts. And then the other main guidelines or standard is a best practice handbook for post-construction mortality monitoring at wind farms, and that's with the International Finance Corporation and others. But we're engaged in those processes through the Energy Task Force, and members, those on the call and any future members interested, there'll be sessions at the December meeting engaging on these two standards. So, for example, IFC and EBRD, the investment banks, will present for an hour on this post-construction monitoring handbook, and there'll be opportunities for the Energy Task Force to comment or give feedback. So it's a really useful. Thank you for raising Osama. It's a really useful opportunity if you'd like to also engage with some of these investment banks that normally we don't get the chance to through some of our daily work.
Thank you very much, Harvey. Another thing is that we are aware that nationally, within national context, there have been efforts to try to establish national depository data centers that can collect at the national level what is there. Of course, there are issues of ownership of data, especially data coming from sometimes from wind farm developers. They are not all the time sharing it in the right way. But for example, again, in Egypt, the law make it clear that the regulation would be clear that all the data coming from the post-monitoring construction is being shared with a central data base that is being developed. Another example nationally had been already developed in Jordan very recently, and RSN was winner of the recent RGI award based on the work in the energy sector. The data base is one of those areas that were looked at as a shiny example. So yes, there are examples global at local level, and hopefully those will talk to each other perfectly with the auxiliary tools that are being now developed. And then hopefully there will be a more complete scene that would allow us to look into details into the global image the way it is. Thank you for that. Good. Final remarks, questions?
We've got another comment in the chat, which I think I can hopefully answer. So the post-construction monitoring document, the plan, we will find out more in the December meeting, but the plan is for that to be distributed and published sort of early mid next year, 2021. And yeah, we'll certainly be promoting it through the Energy Task Force and BirdLife.
Excellent, thank you. We look forward to DOPS, Slovenia also being part of the Energy Task Force. That is an important country. Important work has been taken by DOPS already in the country. Thank you very much, Pia, for your question. Good, excellent. If no further comments and questions, I would like to sincerely thank, we are having one, SAPCO, Georgian BirdLife partner. We are having more than one now, sorry. So from Georgian BirdLife partner, I have more specific question. We have an ongoing case on the wind power. Would like to know how much should be the distance between the wind power turbine Raptor and Raptor's nest. The company we are having case against is claiming there is an EIA report that the distance should be 2 to 3 kilometers is enough. What would be your opinion about that? Ooh. Well, that is very detailed issue, yes. I would say. Yeah.
I would answer that simply by saying, and it is very technical, we would confirm that if you were to email that question to us, we would contact the scientists that are involved in that area and ask them to provide you with the information. So that would be our approach to that question.
Thank you. Khaled, the new chair of NCE in Egypt, and welcome Khaled, look forward to working with you. He's also being approached the organization by PhD and master students who are interested in the field, and they would like to know if it is possible for students to access the data through the ETF.
Sorry, is that regarding the best practice handbook, or is regarding the database of literature?
Well, it is not clear in the, I would think that, yeah, that's a general question perhaps.
Yeah. If it is about the literature database that we've developed, we can guide people in that process. Again, if they contact us, we can help them to look at that. We're not making that database publicly available because many of the articles that are in there aren't, have been purchased, or they're not available to be shared publicly by the contract that the authors have with their publishing companies, etc., especially the peer-reviewed literature in the journals that they've published through. We have to be careful of that. But if you contact us and it's for a specific purpose, that's quite permissible.
Great. So it is clear now. Thank you, Khaled, for the question. Excellent. Thank you very much. I would say hopefully this is the beginning of a long relationship between countries, partners, CMS focal points, NGOs, the stakeholders in the energy with the Energy Task Force. Such an educational background. Thank you very much. Again, Dr. Ashton Berry, the Global Climate Change Program Coordinator, BirdLife International, Harvey Reach, the Global Policy Officer in BirdLife, and both on top of the Energy Task Force. That has been very informative indeed. Thank you for that session, and look forward to going ahead with the work, and all the best of luck in your ETF 5 meeting and following webinar. And we'll keep looking at it, and hopefully that will be all going in the right direction. Thank you very much. The floor is now all giving you claps and thanks for your input. So thank you very much. I appreciate also our great audience that have followed with us. Thank you. We have been almost at 50 people at the call at one point of time. That was very good to see that. Thank you very much indeed, and take care and all the best, hopefully till future events in the very near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So